All right. Hey guys, I'm back. I am doing, I've been looking on doing different kinds of content for uh, the YouTube channel. And, I put up the Joker review and I plan on doing other reviews. But I wanted to diversify the content to try and get new people involved and, you know, just stuff that I like that I have interest in and, you know, see who else enjoys it. So, I wanted to, I'm a sports guy. I like sports. So I wanted to, give talk about things that come up in the sports world, whether it's, my main sport, I like baseball a lot. So, I think that's probably going to be the main focus sports wise, but, I'll cover a little of everything. If something interesting comes up in other sports, I'll talk about it. No, it's not only going to be like players and trades and that stuff. I'll talk about some of the more, I guess, uh, back house kind of things. Like rule changes, stuff like that. Just like ownership and different you know, that kind of stuff. I find that interesting, and I think a lot of things that happen in sports are you can draw a relevancy to what's going on in the. I mean, I would say real world, but sports are the real world. Just you know, I guess the political world, things that really have an impact on how our lives are, how we live our lives. And I think a lot of that ties into what happens in sports. So, but, I thought because this week is the winter meetings for Major League Baseball. And if you're not familiar with the winter meetings, it's sort of, I've been twice, and it's sort of all, that's where all the baseball people go. And, that's that's where you used to see a lot of big signings. Like a couple of years ago when Albert Pujols signed with the Angels, it happened at the winter meetings, and I was actually at that winter meetings, and you just we like heard a loud burst of congratulations on the floor of the hotel, and we just knew something was happening, and it turned out that it was the Albert Pujols signing, and I guess those guys worked for the Angels. So just stuff like that. You see players walking around, you see GMs. I mean, a lot of those guys pretty much stay in their hotel room the whole time because they're busy in meetings and everything. But there's a job fair, so if you want to work in baseball, they have a job fair for the minor leagues. And there are some major league jobs there too. But you could also make contacts with, just mingling with people. But it's usually when a lot of rumors start picking up, and because everyone's in the same place, a lot of people get to talking and stuff like that. So I just wanted to run down a bunch of what's happened in the past 2 months or month and a half since the end of the World Series and when free agency got kicked off. Because free agency opened up 5 days after the World Series, and that's when as players were technically able to sign, but baseball's not like football or basketball where guys sign right away. It takes time. I mean, I guess because there's no like hard salary cap, I think, and so I'll just run down that what's happened over the past 6 or 7 weeks. The first big thing the first big deadline, I guess, which came up was arbitration, or not arbitration, decline the qualifying offer. So the way it works is, for those of you who don't know, is it used to be that players were assigned values. And if players were assigned high enough values based on their previous season, the teams that lost those players got draft compensation. They got an extra pick. But that wasn't really working because it took players based on position, and a lot of times players that came with that draft pick compensation weren't really worth it. So it was weird. And also, teams that signed some of those players lost draft picks. So that's like how in 2009, when Mike Trout was drafted, he was drafted by the Angels, but with the pick that the Yankees gave them for signing Mark Teixeira. So now the Yankees probably wouldn't have gotten Mike Trout anyway, because the Angels also had the pick before that. And they basically said they would have, if they only had one draft pick, they would have signed Mike Trout, or drafted Mike Trout. So it may not have made a difference, but I'm just like, that's the kinds of things that went on. And obviously for a player like Mark Teixeira at the time, that wasn't a big deal. But draft picks were attached to relievers who had one really good season and all of a sudden were tied to draft pick compensation. So now what they did, and I still don't think it's a great system, but it's definitely better than it was. But so now teams can offer impending free agents qualifying offers. And those that the amount of money tied to the qualifying offer is based on the top 125 salaries in the last season. So, the average of those salaries is what the qualifying offer is. So this year it was $17.8 million. So the player is offered a qualifying offer, then they have a couple of days to say, well, I'm going to either accept the offer or I'm going to decline the offer. And most of the time, players decline the offer because even though $17.8 million is a lot, and oftentimes it's more than, or sometimes it's more than a player might make in 1 year, the players usually get multi-year offers. So therefore, they would get more than the $17.8 million because they would be signing 3 or 4 year deals or even 5-year deals for a lot more money, total money. And in baseball, all contracts are guaranteed. So, even if you're making $30 million over 3 years, it's probably better than making 17.8 over 1 year, unless you're a gambler. Anything can happen in 1 year. You could get injured but anyway, so the players who declined the qualifying offer were Garrett Cole, Anthony Rendon, Steven Strasburg, Josh Donaldson, Zach Wheeler, Madison Bumgarner, Marcell Ozuna, and Will Smith. Now, there were 2 other players that accepted the qualifying offer, but I'll get to those a little later when I run down the free agent signings that have happened so far. So, that's, those are all top-ish players. Garrett Cole, Anthony Rendon, Steven Strasburg, Josh Donaldson, Madison Bumgarner, and Will Smith are all at the top of their position. Madison Bumgarner is coming off an okay season, but his track record would ensure that he would get much more than the $17.8 million. And Will Smith is one of the top closers last season, and those guys get paid because the relievers are a very fragile position, and it's just not, it's so weird, I feel relievers tend to get overpaid because it's just the way it is. They're in demand, and they sometimes get overpaid for, just the fact that there have been very few relievers who have lived up to their uh, who have been steady their whole career. But so that leaves Zach Wheeler and Marcell Ozuna, who declined the qualifying offer. But I mean, Zach Wheeler, I can understand because he's a starting pitcher. He's coming off 2 really good seasons, but he also missed the entire season before that with an injury, and I still understand why he declined the qualifying offer. He shouldn't have taken the qualifying offer. Marcell Ozuna, on the other hand, I mean, he probably, he'll get more money than the 17.8, but will it be enough to justify giving up that money for the 1 year? That's a risk that you have to evaluate on your own, and you have to see what you're worth and that stuff. And he's not a guy who's injury prone or anything, so maybe. And there are rumors that he has a contract, so we'll see. But in a move that surprised me a little, Coda Glover retired. So Coda Glover is a reliever, and he's had some health issues, but he's still relatively young, and I'm kind of surprised he didn't try and work his way back, because he was just injured this season. He wasn't injured before. Maybe minor injuries, but not like this season he was out pretty much the whole season, I think. But I don't really understand why he wouldn't just try and take take a minor league contract or something and try and work his way back. No, because he could have, if nothing happened next season, he could have retired after next season. So I don't know. It just seemed a little odd to me. But the next thing is, in baseball, there's this thing called so the way baseball works, if you don't know, is that so first of all, there are minor leagues, and once the players get to the majors, the team has 6 years of control over them. The first 3 years are pre-arbitration, where 95% of the time the player is making close to minimum salary, which goes up a little every year. Now I think it's close to $600,000 a year. But like Mike Trout in his 3rd year, he got $1 million, which was like the most anyone's ever got in pre-arbitration. So it's that kind of thing where teams don't usually, no matter how good a player is, they don't usually go crazy for the arbitration. But then the next 3 years is arbitration. So basically, the player submits a number and the team submits a number. And then they have, I think, they have a couple of months to work out, to negotiate, and come up with either a 1-year deal or a multi-year deal. So, but also these are all non-guaranteed contracts. So a team could non-tender a player at any time. There's a non-tender deadline. So every year you see players get non-tendered. Sometimes you get really good players, like 1 year Russell Martin was non-tendered and the Yankees picked him up because they needed a catcher, and he was a really good catcher. I think he was coming off an injury that year. And the other thing is, it's a little weird because the arbitration process is basically, it goes to a court. If you go to the arbitration hearing, it goes to a court, and then the judge decides, the judge hears the case and decides who wins. But the judge doesn't really have any baseball background. So it's sort of, they rely on like stats that aren't necessarily relevant anymore and stuff like that. And also, teams can only offer at the lowest 80% of what the player made in the previous season. So if a player gets injured for the whole season, and it's a significant injury, like a shoulder injury for a pitcher, or a knee injury for a fast player, or a wrist injury for a home run hitter, stuff like that, it sometimes gives pause for teams, because if the guy's making $5 million, do you want to offer him $4 million? So it's just, maybe he's worth less than that. Maybe you feel like, he's not going to be there's more risk than reward. So, every year there are a couple of guys who are good that you can pick up off at a free agency when they're non-tendered. This year struck me because this year there were a bunch of players who, they've been good in the past. And, maybe they're coming off down seasons or whatever. And it just seemed a little strange to me that some of these guys were non-tendered. Now, so it's so I broke up them in two categories. I said the guys who I'm really surprised were non-tendered, and the guys who, I can understand, like, they never really showed potential yet. They never really lived up to their potential, I should say, yet. And they sort of underperformed this last year. over previous seasons, and they're making, decent money where teams may not be willing to extend them the contract. So first, the players who fall into the category of, I'm pretty surprised that they were non-tendered are Domingo Santana, Blake Trainin, Taijuan Walker, Kevin Gausman, Jose Peraza, Travis Shaw, and Cesar Hernandez. So, first of all, Domingo Santana is an outfielder who, while he's not like a top outfielder, he's a really good outfielder for, maybe a smaller market team who's not, can't pay the guys like $20 million or whatever. So it's a little strange that he got non-tendered. I mean, it's pretty strange because, he hits home runs. He's not terrible at anything really. So, that I guess would be the most surprising out of everyone on the list. But then you have Blake Trainin, who, this is a guy who in 2018 was a closer for the Oakland A's, and he had a .78 ERA. So, I mean, first of all, he was never going to have a .78 ERA again, because that's just insane. But, he had a bad year in 2019, but he definitely, his true talent wasn't that bad. And he got injured this year. So I'm thinking maybe it's just that, like what I was saying before, it's, they don't want to pay, the team feels like paying him 80% of his contract in 2019 was too much, given that he was coming off an injury. And like what I was saying before, relievers are pretty fragile. And, they don't necessarily perform the way you think they're going to perform, for whatever reason. Relievers tend to be failed starters, so they have issues with control or, whatever. But then, so Taijuan Walker, and, when he was a prospect, he was a top prospect, top starting pitching prospect coming up. And he's never really lived up to the expectations. But he's definitely a middle of the rotation starter. And given what middle of the rotation starters go for on the free market, on the free agency market, I don't see why you wouldn't tender him a contract, because, you're seeing mid-rotation starters get like $15 million on the open market. So why wouldn't you give a guy like Taijuan Walker $7 million and, for him to be in the middle of your rotation? It just doesn't, I don't know. That was a weird one to me. But then, Kevin Gausman is another one because no, he's another former top prospect who has never really lived up to his potential, except for like one season, I want to say. But he's had a couple of good seasons. But last season, while it wasn't the best, it wasn't a very good season. He did improve his peripherals, which to me, signifies, he improved his swing strike percentage by 3%, which is a pretty big percentage, and that indicates more strikeouts. And usually the better pitchers have, or the more consistent pitchers, I should say, have pretty high swinging strikeout or swinging strike percentages because, that's just how it is. The better pitchers can get hitters to swing and miss. But I did look at his contract last season, and his contract was $9.5 million. So, that maybe they didn't, I guess 80% of that would be like about $9 million. And maybe, his team didn't feel like, I think, was he on Atlanta? Or no, he was traded. I forgot who he was on. But, and I think his ERA was like near 5. So, maybe the team just didn't want to take the risk, and because his salary, while, it's not, I think he could be a lot better than what he's paid for, what he would be paid this season. I don't know. Maybe it's just a small market team wouldn't necessarily want to be spending that on a question mark like that. So Jose Peraza, I mean, he's another guy who hasn't really lived up to his potential, but I mean, I sort of feel like to replace people on the open market, you have to pay a lot more than these guys usually. So I don't know. I would have, but I don't. I mean, he was on the Reds. I or no, I think the Reds traded him. But those teams, if they have prospects, major league ready prospects, you might want to let the prospects play over them, especially if you're not really in competition mode or ready to compete this year. But I don't know. Just, I guess, all else being equal, you probably should have been tendered a contract. But when you take everything into consideration, I mean, I guess it's not that surprising. Travis Shaw's a surprising one because in 2018 he hit 30 home runs. And while he may not do everything else good, he's like with Jose Peraza. I don't think he wasn't making a ton of money. He was making like $5 or $6 million. So I think he probably should have been tendered, but I don't know. I mean, I guess those guys are kind of replaceable, especially with the juiced ball, because I think more players than ever were hitting 20 plus home runs. So it's not, home runs weren't that rare this year. I mean, the Minnesota Twins blew away the record. So, you know, uh, then then there was Cesar Hernandez, who, while he's not a great player, he's a good player and he plays a lot of positions. So he's not going to ever get paid a lot of money through arbitration because he's not a great player. But given that there's a limited amount of roster space, guys who can play multiple positions are very valuable. And I just don't understand why, because he was on the Phillies. And the Phillies are a big market team. They have a lot of money. I don't know why the Phillies wouldn't just pay him to have him on the bench and, where he could fill in for if guys get injured, because, I mean, a bench usually has four players in the AL, 5 players in the NL. So the Phillies are in the NL, so 5 players. They need to have a backup catcher. You need to have an outfielder. Usually, it's a corner outfielder. Usually, corner outfielders don't play center field or can play center field. And corner outfielders usually are good hitters. So usually you want to have a corner outfielder on your bench so they could also pinch hit when you need a home run or whatever. Then you have middle infielder, which Cesar Hernandez could fill in at second, short, third. I'm sure he can play first too. Center, I think he could play. And you then need a first baseman who sometimes can be your corner outfielder also, because a lot of them play both. And then you need a center fielder. Or someone who can play center field. And usually you want those guys to be defensive minded, so they could come in and if you're in the lead by 1 run, you could fill the role. You could, save. It can be a defensive asset. So that's just my feeling on Cesar Hernandez, and I think he is more valuable than people realize and in real life. And I don't know. It was because I can't imagine none of those guys when I looked on looked at their contracts were making a ton of money. The only one was Kevin Gausman, who was making 9.5. So that's when I could see the 80% contract coming into play, where, I don't know, Cesar Hernandez, I think, is worth whatever he got paid last year, with probably some increase. Maybe if, but I don't know. Teams also, the arbitration thing can be a little tricky. But then there was, then on the players, I was surprised, but not really surprised about, were Yolmer Sanchez, Addison Russell, Steven Souza Jr., Aaron Sanchez, Jimmy Nelson, Maikel Franco, Kevin Pillar, and CJ Cron. So all of these guys were, useful in the past. Maybe not last year, but, the year before that or the year before that. And like I've been saying before, I can't imagine any of these guys asking for that much of a raise. And, and if they would, they wouldn't get it. I don't think any judge would pay for that or would side with them. So, like Addison Russell was a former top prospect who hasn't really lived up to his potential. Steven Souza Jr. was, I believe he was in the deal with Trey Turner, that deal. The deal where the Nationals got a player to be named later, and that player turned out to, everyone knew immediately that it was Trey Turner, even though, they couldn't reveal it, even though that was the player. It was a weird thing, and that resulted in the MLB changing its rules about when players could be traded. So, I mean, that, well, let's just say that hasn't really worked out for the Rays, who acquired, Steven Souza, but I don't know. But he had a good year. Not last year, but the year before that. I think last year he was injured. Aaron Sanchez is another one. I mean, he's weird because when he came up with the Blue Jays, he was really good as a reliever. And then they tried to mess around with him and make him a starter, which I think he's just a reliever. I mean, that's so, I don't know. But I think, maybe he's making starter money, and I don't know. But so Jimmy Nelson, I guess I can understand why he was non-tendered. I mean, he's never really lived up to his reputation at all, except for one season a couple of years ago, where he had a pretty good season, and people thought that he was going to grow from that, but he never really did. So I guess I can understand why he was non-tendered. But I think he's worth checking out, seeing if something's there. And I don't know how much money he was making. It could be that kind of. But then you have Michael Franco, who, I've probably, if I were, because he's another Phillies guy who, I probably would have given another year to see what he had. And, you know, because he was a top prospect. Everyone thought he was going to be like a big guy to come up. And then you have, but he never really, he's sort of like an all or nothing guy. He hits home runs, but not much else. But, I think he could be like a good bench player who comes in and you can rely on for power. Then you have Kevin Pillar. I mean, Kevin Pillar is a sort of a speed guy who, I don't know. I feel like those guys are pretty dangerous because once they lose one step, they're not nearly as good as they were. So I think maybe that's, why he wasn't tendered a contract. Because, like looking at his stolen base totals, they were going down a little. He's not like a guy who ever hit 320. And so I guess I can understand that. But, like he does play center field, so does play a premium position. So I think someone will pick him up pretty quickly. CJ Cron's another power guy who, I mean, I could see, I could see some, I could see him useful as a backup first base, backup corner outfield guy. And that's kind of why I'm kind of surprised that these guys, because even though none of them are stars, they don't make a ton of money, baseball wise. They make a ton of money to your average person, but in baseball terms, they don't make a ton of money. So I don't know. I guess most of the teams that non-tendered those guys have a replacement waiting who makes probably close to the minimum. So they just felt we could use the extra money to upgrade somewhere else. But then something interesting happened, which a lot of people have been wondering what's going to happen with this guy. The Yankees released Jacoby Ellsbury. So, uh, I'm trying to remember maybe it was after the 2013 season. The Yankees signed Jacoby Ellsbury to a 7-year deal worth $22 million per year. And the first couple of seasons, he was okay. He wasn't, the guy he was that season with the Red Sox, who, they won the World Series that year. He was really good for them. But, he was sort of a guy who, he's a guy who relied on speed, was never really, I guess, consistent. So a lot of people felt that, and me included, felt that it wasn't a great signing. And as you can see, I'm a Yankee fan, so I pay attention to their stuff a lot. And it was also coming on the heels of a couple of other bad signings, like Carl Vano a couple of years before that, and AJ Burnett. And at the time, I remember, I forget who else they signed that year. But at the time, I felt like it was the best signing that they signed that year, because they had signed a couple of other guys to big contracts too. And I felt, well, yeah, they overpaid for him, but at least I thought he was the best signing. But, he's been injured the past couple of seasons. He hasn't played at all. So a lot of people were wondering what they were going to do with him, because, it's sort of a weird situation where, like, he's probably going to be injured all season, but at the same time, once the off season ends, you have to put him on the 25-man roster, and then you can take him off that until spring training at the very earliest. And it's just, it's just an unnecessary slot to have on your contract, on your roster, and it's just, but the thing is that those $22 million are still on the payroll. So for a team like the Yankees or the Dodgers or the Red Sox, while overall the salary may not be a lot to them, they, they're confined to spending a certain amount of money, or they have to pay a pretty steep penalty, because it's not just money anymore. The penalties are tied to draft picks and international free agency money. So teams sort of act as the luxury tax penalty. After, I think this year it's $246 million. Teams don't really want to go past that, because if they go past that, that's when they have to start paying more than money for the penalty. So, but I like that you don't have to worry about him, being healthy and sort of being a hole on the bench. And I think that's really just why, probably they feel, I don't know. I don't know enough about the whole payroll thing's pretty complicated. So, but so let's get into the signings that have happened so far. I mean, there haven't been too many big names, but I'll go down by team. And I mean, I'll go quickly. There's not much to talk about, really. Okay, so we have the Cardinals signed Adam Wainwright to a 1-year, $5 million deal. I mean, he's old, but he's been on the Cardinals his whole career, so I feel like, and he's still useful. He's still a good back-end starters. So, it's good to have depth, and he could pitch out of the bullpen. So it was a good signing. The next one, so for the Twins, Jake Odorizzi accepted the qualifying offer. He was offered a qualifying offer by the Twins, and he accepted that offer. So he's signed for a 1-year, $17.8 million. Now, I don't know what he would have gotten. He probably would have gotten more than that, but maybe I don't know. Maybe he's hoping that next year he'll get more money, more average annual value, and thinking that he'll probably get the same length contract. Who knows? But then, then the Twins also signed Michael Pineda, who got a 2-year, $20 million contract. I believe that's the same exact contract that he got last time. He's, been decent and injured, and so it's like I was saying before, pitchers can get, like, mediocre pitchers get $15 million a year. So, and so I think $10 million a year is a good deal for him. Hopefully, obviously they're hoping he could pitch, and he pitches well, and there's enough room for surplus value there. Next, they signed Alex Avila to a 1-year, $4.25 million contract. So he'll basically be their backup catcher. I think Jason Castro, who was their starter / backup catcher, is a free agent. So, he'll probably want to start. So they've probably felt like, we'll just give Alex Avila a contract, because they have Mitch Garver, who broke out, and he's going to be their catcher of the future. So then the Mariners signed Carl Edwards Jr. to a 1-year, $950,000 contract. He's a reliever, and he had some good years with the Cubs, so I think it's a good value signing for them. Hopefully he can, they're not necessarily competing, but we've seen before, relievers at the trade deadline can get a lot of value, and at $950,000, you're not paying them that much. So again, in baseball terms. Then the Chicago White Sox signed catcher Yasmani Grandal, and they re-signed first baseman Jose Abreu. Grandal got 4 years, $73 million. He was one of the best catchers in baseball last year, so you can understand that. He may have been, he probably could have even gotten more. I don't know. Who knows? Good catchers are hard to come by. Good offensive catchers are hard to come by. Jose Abreu, he got 3 years, $50 million, and he also accepted their qualifying offer, but he signed the contract before the deadline. So, and either way, he could have still negotiated. But, basically he's getting the qualifying offer over 3 years. That's basically what it is. I mean, it's not exactly that, but I think it comes out to 17.5 or something. So then the Braves have signed a bunch of people. So they signed Travis d'Arnaud, catcher. They also signed Tyler Flowers. They signed Travis d'Arnaud to a 2-year, $16 million contract. And then they signed Tyler Flowers to a 1-year, $4 million contract. So clearly Travis d'Arnaud is going to be their starting catcher, and Tyler Flowers is going to be their backup. They're both whatever. They're not. But the Braves have a starting catching prospect who is coming up, who, I think they're looking for him to be the guy in 2021. Then they signed Cole Hamels to a 1-year, $18 million contract where, it might be a lot of money for Cole Hamels, but I don't know. I feel like 1-year deals are always good. I don't know. It's just 1-year deals, whatever happens next season, as long as you're not like going overboard, going over your payroll to sign that guy, it's not going to hurt you. Then they re-signed Nick Markakis to a 1-year, $4 million deal. That's a pretty good deal. He's a corner outfielder. At that money, you wouldn't hesitate to put him on the bench. So, then they signed Darren O'Day to a 1-year, $2.75 million contract. He's been a good reliever before. He's a little older now, but again, it's not going to break the bank, that contract. Then they signed Chris Martin, who's a reliever, to a 2-year, $14 million contract. That's, again, relievers are getting more and more money. So while $7 million used to be a lot for a reliever, it's not really anymore. And he was good last season, so I think they're hoping that he can be good again. Will Smith signed with the Atlanta Braves for 3 years, $40 million. And like I said before, he was one of the best closers in the league last year, and the Atlanta Braves will have to give up draft picks next year, but it's this in baseball. It's like now under the new rules, and because Atlanta's a small market team, or considered a small market team, and they don't spend a lot of money, I think they have to give up like a 3rd and a 5th round pick. So while it hurts, it's not like detrimental, I guess. It's not like when they used to have to give up a 1st round pick. So, and like I said, he was one of the best closers in baseball last year. So the next signing is a little crazy to me. The Phillies signed Zach Wheeler to a 5-year, $118 million deal. So that's almost $24 million a year. And I mean, Zach, like I said, Zach Wheeler had 2 really good years the last 2 years. But before that, he was injured. So I kind of feel like whenever they have significant injury history, it's a pretty risky thing. But the Phillies are one of the bigger. They're not afraid to spend. So I think even if that signing goes south, they could withstand that. They're not going to feel it like some other teams would. The Cincinnati Reds signed free agent Mike Moustakas. So, he'll probably play second base. He's played third base in the past, but the Reds have Eugenio Suarez, who, he just hit 49 home runs. And so I think, but they signed him to a 4-year, $64 million contract with an option for a 5th year. So, he's good. I mean, I don't, but they're ready to go for it. So then the Nats signed Howie Kendrick to a 1-year, $6.25 million deal. And, he was sort of the hero of the World Series. So that's a really good signing for them. I mean, at worst, that's what he'll produce. I mean, he's always been a good player. And, last year he sort of performed higher. He won't be that good next year, but, he'll probably be better than $6.25 million, and they'll get their money from it. And then they also signed Yan Gomes to a 2-year, $10 million deal, and he'll be a catcher. He'll be probably their backup catcher. But he's been decent, and like I said, it's hard to find good catchers, and at $5 million a year, that's not crazy. And then the Texas Rangers signed Kyle Gibson to a 3-year, $28 million deal. And, Kyle Gibson's another guy who he's a mid-rotation kind of starter, and at a little more than $9 million a year, that's a really good signing because, like I said, there are a lot of mid-rotation pitchers getting $15 million a year. So, the one thing I would worry about is the fact that Rangers play in Haters Park and pitchers usually tend to struggle in those parks. So we'll see. But either way, I'm sure he'll live up to that contract. Then the Cubs signed Dan Winkler to a 1-year, $750,000 contract. He's a reliever, and like I said, signing relievers to those cheap contracts can only benefit you. It can't harm you. So, and then they signed Kendall Graveman to a 1-year, $2 million deal. And Graveman's, he was a starter. I think he relieved some in the past. But at $2 million, that's nothing, really. I mean, especially for a team like the Cubs, they can afford that. And he'll be moving to the National League. And, we'll see. I mean, either way, it's a good deal. Then the Mets signed Brad Brack to a 1-year, $850,000 deal with an option. And, it's like with Dan Winkler. He's a reliever. It'll be a good deal. Then the Brewers signed Jordan Lyles to a 2-year, $16 million deal. Same thing. I mean, if it's not going to hurt them, he's a pitcher. He'll probably. I mean, I don't think he's been good before in the bullpen. So if they put him in the bullpen, and he can find some of that, relive some of that magic, he could be a really good reliever for them and maybe get flipped at the deadline because, they did lose Yasmani Grandal. I mean, they still have Christian Yelich, but I mean, I don't know. It's sort of, I mean, they also have Josh Hader as their closer. So Lyles won't be their closer, but he could be a setup guy or a middle reliever to start and then end up as a setup guy. Or they could decide to see what he has in the rotation. So then Oakland signed Jake Diekman to a 2-year, $7.5 million deal. That's, like I said, he's a reliever, so, and in Oakland's a pitcher park, so they'll probably get a good, he'll probably perform well. The Diamondbacks signed Stephen Vogt to a 1-year, $3 million deal. He's a catcher. He'll be their backup. And $3 million is not a lot, not a ton of money for a backup catcher. Then the Padres signed Drew Pomeranz to a 4-year, $34 million deal. He's been really good as a reliever in the past, so I think that's where they'll use him. And at under $9 million a year, he'll 8.5. He'll probably live up to that deal. Probably even provide a little surplus. But then the Giants signed Tyler Anderson to a 1-year, $1.77 million deal. He's coming over from Colorado. I don't know if he was in Colorado last year, but that's where he started. That's where he got his start. And Colorado is brutal on pitchers. So moving to an extreme pitchers park like San Francisco, he should probably outperform that deal. If not a lot of money for a pitcher. So let's move on to trades, and then that'll be it. So the first trade is where the Tampa Bay Rays traded pitcher Jose De Leon to the Cincinnati Reds for a player to be named later and cash. So player to be named laters are usually not like Trey Turner, who we talked about before, but they're usually a group of players who the team getting one of them just wants a little more time to evaluate. So in this case, the Rays and Reds agreed on a group of players who the Reds would be comfortable sending, and the Rays have burned some teams before, so that's something to look out on with a player to be named later. When they traded Chris Archer to the Pirates, they got a player to be named later, and that turned out to be Shane Baz, who is a top 100 prospect now, and I believe he's in the 50s or 60s now. And, now that I've seen, now cash can also mean international free agency money. So, the way the MLB changed those rules, so they give teams an allotted amount, and then they can trade for a certain amount more from other teams. So in the past, cash used to mean like just straight up money, but now it can also mean the ability to use more money on the international free agency market. So we'll see, what that is. And they usually don't announce it. It's usually just, although for international free agency, they probably would. They'd probably say, they got $500,000 or whatever. It can only be traded in $250,000 increments. So, we'll see. And that probably depends on who the player to be named later is, and, whether at the time the Rays ask for him, how the Reds view him talent-wise. But Jose De Leon was a top pitching prospect for the Dodgers, and I forgot how the Rays got him, but he's sort of been injured the last couple of years and hasn't pitched, so he's sort of lost that top prospect luster, and sometimes those guys come back to be like they were, and sometimes they don't. So it's sort of a wild card trade. The next one's also sort of a wild card trade because the A's trade Jarrell Cotton to the Cubs for cash. So Jarrell Cotton's sort of in the same boat as Jose De Leon. Jarrell was a top a good pitching prospect who had some promise. He showed some promise at the major league level. Then he got injured. Hasn't pitched in the past year and a half, I believe. So that's another one who the Cubs aren't really giving up anything. They're giving up cash, and it probably wouldn't be that much, probably depending on how Cotton performs for, whether he's healthy, how healthy he is, whatever. But, it's the same thing. He's a wild card. And then the San Diego Padres and the Milwaukee Brewers connected on a trade. The Padres will receive a player to be named later, Eric Lauer, or no, they trade a player to be named later, Eric Lauer, and Luis Urias to Milwaukee for Trent Grisham and Zach Davies. So this was a little surprising to a lot of people because Luis Urias is a top middle infield prospect who many people thought was going to start for the Padres at second base this season, or at some point this season. And, Trent Grisham he reached Milwaukee mid-season last year, and he's another top-ish prospect, another top 100 definitely, but I don't think his prospect status was ever as high as Urias's, but the Padres outfield is kind of a mess. They're not really, I think they're trying to figure out their outfield, so I could understand it. Zach Davies is decent, and Eric Lauer, who they gave up, I think he's a back end of the rotation type guy who could have upside, but I think probably Lauer and Davies are kind of a wash. So really, it's Urias and a player to be named later for Trent Grisham. And I don't know. I don't know who the player to be named later is. And like I said, I think people were just shocked because Luis Urias was thought of as the next guy for them. People thought he was an integral part to their rebuilding coming to fruition in the next couple of years. And then the Padres also made another trade. They traded catcher Austin Allen and a player to be named later to the Oakland A's for Jurickson Profar. So this I can understand because, Austin Allen, while, he's a good offensive catching prospect, he doesn't really have a spot with the Padres. The Padres have a bunch of catchers, so they don't really need him. And Jurickson Profar is a former top prospect, second base, shortstop kind of guy, plays first base. I think he could play corner outfield, maybe even center field in a pinch. And he sort of never lived up to the prospect luster, but he's still really young. And Oakland's not a great place for hitters. And I mean, neither is San Diego, but maybe I think I because Profar was originally from the Rangers. The A's acquired him from the Rangers, and now the coaches that were on the Rangers during that time, when Profar was there, are now in the Padres organization. So I could see why maybe they know something most people don't know how to fix him and get him on the right track. And guys all the time that are former top prospects, they're late bloomers all the time with those guys. So then there's the Baltimore Orioles traded Jonathan Villar to Miami for Easton Lucas. Now, Villar was a person who most people thought was going to be non-tendered. So that's why, they got, and Villar's another one who, he had a really down year, but prior to this year, he was actually good. So, but because they were going to non-tender him and everyone really knew that, they didn't get anything. They got Easton Lucas, who isn't even in the Marlins top 30 prospects, or wasn't in the Marlins top 30 prospects. So, it was sort of, better to get something than get nothing kind of deal. Then the Boston Red Sox traded Sandy León to the Indians for a Dennis Bautista. So this trade, I get it for the Red Sox because, I'm not familiar with Bautista, but, I'm sure they see something they like. They just fired their GM, so I think they're moving in a different direction. And Sandy León, he's a fine backup, but really, those guys are pretty easy to find, backup catcher types. So then the Baltimore Orioles then traded Dylan Bundy to the Angels for Isaac Matson, Kyle Bradish, Kyle Brnovich, and Zach Peak. So basically 4 right-handed pitchers they got in return for Dylan Bundy. Dylan Bundy is another guy. He was a top pitching prospect. He was like a top 5 pick. But he's never really lived up to expectations. He was called up really quick to the majors, but then they sort of sent him back down to the minors for a couple of years, so I don't know. He was kind of handled weirdly, and I think he still has some upside, and I think, so we'll see. They got a lot of guys in return. I don't know, I guess they're just hoping that one of those guys turns into something. Who knows? Then the Seattle Mariners traded Omar Narvaez to the Brewers for Adam Hill and future considerations. Now, I'm not really sure what future considerations mean as opposed to cash or a player to be named later. Maybe it's just either or. I don't know. But, I mean, Narvaez hit like 22 home runs for the Mariners. So maybe, and like I said, the Brewers lost Yasmani Grandal. So, maybe they're hoping that Narvaez could be their guy for, until they find someone better. Because, he was pretty good. But like I said, juice ball. And I think there have been rumors that they're going to go back to the old ball, which would sort of take away a lot of players' power increase. And Adam Hill's not really. I mean, he's a pitcher, but, I mean, the Seattle's a pitcher's park, so maybe, he plays better there than anywhere else, but, who knows. Then the Astros traded Jake Marisnick to the Mets for Blake Taylor and Kennedy Corona. So this is sort of like, Jake Marisnick is like a fourth outfielder type, and none of the guys that got back, Blake Taylor or Kennedy Corona, are anything special. I don't even know who they are. So, they're not top prospects. They're not anything good. They're what you could expect in return for a fourth outfielder. That's really it. And then this trade just happened, I think last night or the day before. But the Tampa Bay Rays traded Tommy Pham and Jake Cronenworth to the San Diego Padres for Hunter Renfroe, Xavier Edwards, and the player to be named later. So Tommy Pham was a good player, and the Rays actually got him, and he was even better on the Rays than he was. I believe he was on the Cardinals before that. But no, he's another guy who kind of relies on speed, and he's getting a little older. I believe he's 30 or 31, and he's starting to lose some steps, and it's what happens with those guys. When those guys start to slow down, they start losing their value a lot. So, because the fast guys usually don't have a ton of power. And, a lot of times they're ground ball hitters and rely on their speed to beat out ground balls, infield hits. And then Jake Cronenworth, he's a shortstop prospect. He's okay. He's not. I think he's major league ready. So I guess maybe that's what the Padres are hoping, that he could be on their bench. I don't know. Or maybe fill in while their prospects get ready. But then, they gave up Hunter Renfroe. He's a power guy, but he's never really lived up to his average. He was supposed to be hit for a decent average. He's never really done that. But he's also had some really bad luck, so maybe a move to Tampa Bay and a move out of Petco Park in San Diego can increase his numbers, his average, and with his, because he hit like 33 home runs last year. So if he can hit 260, 270, and hit 33 home runs and get on base, he'll be a good player. And then they got Xavier Edwards, who is sort of like, people were shocked that he was in the deal because, he's a guy who a lot of people like a lot. And, middle infield prospect who, just people really like him, and he's a good prospect, and I think people were expecting, especially after the Luis Urias trade, they were expecting him to be the future for the Padres, even though he was further away. I think he's in like A-ball, and he was going to be in Double-A to start the year. So, at best, he would have been able to come up in 2021. And then, the wild card in the trade to me is a player to be named later. Because, like I said last time, the last time the Rays got in the Chris Archer deal, the player to be named later was Shane Baz. And Shane Baz is now a top 100 prospect. So I'd be worried anytime the Rays ask for a player to be named later in the trade. But that really wraps up all the deals that have been made prior to the winter meetings. There are a couple of other non-player things that have gone down in baseball, and some rule changes that I'll probably make another video soon, and then I will, we'll see. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this. I don't want to do all these, review all these moves at once. Again, it's a lot to cover, and, maybe I'll do, whenever a big thing happens, I'll talk about it, and then I'll cover also the other little things that have happened. But, the little things that happen are usually never amount to anything. But, we'll see what happens this week. But yeah, because, it's some winter meetings, you have big signings, others you don't. Sometimes the big free agents wait till February to sign. You never know what's going to happen in baseball, but usually you get a trade or two, because the trades, it's easier to do when you're in person, and you can sort of like say, okay, we both want these two guys, and let's lock ourselves in the room until we figure something out. So that's the type of thing that could happen at the winter meetings, because everyone's at the same hotel, and I think this year it's in San Diego, so we'll see. But as usual, check us out on check the Unuseful Idiots out on all the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everything. Uh, check out the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. This video will be up on YouTube. I don't think I'm gonna bother putting it on the podcast feed because I think this sort of podcast episode will do a lot better on YouTube. People sort of looking for baseball content probably won't go to, they're not going to go to a podcast and search for it. And this stuff won't be regular. But if you are listening to this for the first time because you stumbled on it, or watching it, I should say, because you stumbled on it on YouTube, check us out. Check the podcast out on any platform you listen to podcasts, whether it's iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, Overcast, and just listen to us, subscribe, leave a review, rank. You can also go to Liberty Podcast Ranker and vote for us. Help us move up those charts. So, I don't know what it really does if people really pay attention to it. But, I'm sure, other people going there for other podcasts, if we're up near the top of the chart, they'll see us and want to check it out. So, go do that. And all the information is on the website, theunusefulidiots.com. And Patreon. You could support us on Patreon if you like the content, the baseball content, or just everything, whatever content you like that I put out, consider contributing and helping the podcasts grow, or the videos grow, the quality, the whatever, just helping it grow, and more content, stuff like that. We're on Patreon, also on Subscribestar, PayPal, and everything's on the website. So if you don't remember, just go to the website, check it out, see where we are. There are also memes on the website that I made, so you could check out those memes too. And that's it, guys. So I'll see you I'll be recording a regular podcast episode in the next couple of days, or probably tomorrow. But I'll try and get the non-baseball, non-player, the more backhouse stuff that I was talking about earlier in the episode. I'll try and get that out this week before the winter meetings end, and then we could maybe next weekend after the winter meetings recap everything that went on at the winter meetings, and also maybe if there's anything interesting that happened at the Rule 5 draft. because those can be interesting at times. So, yeah, see you next time. Bye.